We kick things off with 7 fascinating stories from the teshuvos of the Rishonim of Spain, where we discover shul seats being treated like real estate, bought, sold, inherited, mortgaged, and sometimes the center of heated disputes. Then we shift our focus to Ashkenaz, where this phenomenon is noticeably absent, suggesting a very different set of attitudes and conventions about shul seats. Finally, we dive into how poskim tackled some of these disputes, applying Halachah to their contemporary realities. The Rashba, Reb Shlomo ben Aderes, one of the great Rishonim from Spain, from Barcelona. He passed away in the early 1300s, to give you a picture of when he lived, has a teshuvah in where he says the following story that was asked of him. Sha'alta, you have asked of me. Eis asher banu kahal asher bevalencia beis hakneses. When the Jewish community in the Spanish eastern city of Valencia, when they built the shul, chalku oisa, they divided it, meaning everyone was designated where they're going to be sitting. V'kasvu pinkas echad b'chaluka, and they wrote this all down. They documented this in a notebook. Shakavu makom yeshiva pliny lepliny, that they designated this seat to this person. And this is what they did for the entire shul. V'haisa b'neim ketata ala chaluka, but that didn't resolve everything. There were still disputes. Some people were not happy. And that happened pamayim, shalosh, second time, a third time, uvachol pam v'pam, and every time there was a debate about where people are going to be sitting, hayu yoshvan lachaluka. So the community leaders would reconvene to discuss again what the seating arrangement is going to be. And again, they would always document their findings in this pinkas. V'nasnu akol beis mekomis lebeis Yehudim biyachad. So during this division process, the community designated 2 seats, 2 places to 2 Jews, and it's together, biyachad. What's going to become clear, biyachad over here, is that the 2 of them are going to create their own, they're going to make their own bench, and they're both going to be sitting on this bench. V'ashu hashnayim lehem kisei, so these 2 individuals went and they contracted to create their own chair. In other words, the pews were not given by the community. You only got the place. The chair itself that you had to go do on your own. So they went and they made their own chair. V'yashvu b'yachad, and they sat together ad yud shanim v'yosef for more than 10 years. La'achar yud shanim, after 10 years of these 2 yidalach sitting next to each other, meisa echad mehem, one of them died. V'nishar b'noi v'yashav al makoymai. So the child inherited the seat. So here you see the seat being treated like property, where it is inherited by the son, and he takes his father's seat. So he's the heir. V'gam hashutav habeis. Then you have the second partner to the seat area. Ratza laleches b'makam achal, he wanted to move out of Valencia. So v'nasan mekom. So what did he do with his spot? Right? What happens today? If you leave shul, right? What did he do? But because the seat, as is going to become clearer and clearer, is treated like property, what do you do when you have property you no longer need? He gave his seat to one of his friends, b'matana gemura, a complete gift, uvekinyan gomor, and they made an actual kinyan, uvishtar, and a document. Right? So this here you see again how the seat in the shul is being treated literally like real estate. So for the first time, the person passes away, child steps in, inheritance, the heir steps in. In the second half of the same seat, of the same bench, the guy moves out, and what happens is that he gives it as a matana, but he doesn't want it just to be a matana. He makes a document about it, they make a kinyan. This is a serious transfer of property from one person to the other. And so the result is we have here 2 individuals now sitting in this same seat. One is the heir, and one is the friend. Okay. U'mekabel matana zu, and the friend who received this gift, Yasha ba'osei amakam la'achar matana, he sat in this spot, Yud tes shanim retzufa, 19 years. La'achar kol oisan hashanim, after all of those years. So it's after there's the 10 initial years when the principals were sitting there, and then 19 years when they're no longer here, and the Mekabel Matana is sitting in this. So it's many years later. Amru la'osei yoirish, the community leaders told the heir, Osei makam shu yoshev boy, the place where you're sitting, it's actually not your seat. Hu l'shchenoi, that belongs to the gift recipient. The place where the gift recipient is sitting, that's actually your seat, which was given to your father. How do we know? Because that's what it says in this memo, in this notebook that we have from 29 years ago. So this heir comes along, and he gets upset at the recipient of this gift. Hey, you're sitting in my seat. Now, if you imagine these as two equal seats right next to each other that had the same value, so then it doesn't make sense. Why would one be upset? But as becomes clear from a later part in the tshuva of the Rashba, one of these, the Rashba says, one of these seats was barosh, and one was not barosh. So barosh means ahead, barosh could mean forward facing. I'm not entirely sure, but the reality is there's a spot, there's two seats, one is a much better seat, and the heir says, hey, that actually, according to the document, that's supposed to be my seat because it was my father's seat, and I, as the inheritor, should be taking that seat. The recipient of the gift said, what are you talking about? I received it from Yankel. Yankel sat there 10 years without a protest. And I myself have sat here for 19 years without any protest. So in this case, hadin in me. Who is the halacha supposed to follow? The most interesting thing about, for me, when reading this tshuva, is you would imagine that we're talking about a piece of real estate, a property. And this is the type of disputes that you have over property. We're not used to seeing it over a shul, a location within a shul seat. And that's exactly what we're seeing over here. This is the story of the heir and the friend. We're going to come back to see how the Rashba addressed this issue later on. That's story number 1. This is the first of 7 stories that we're going to look at right now at the beginning of today's shir. Let's go to story number 2, and that's we're calling the monopolist. This comes from the Rivash. The Rivash is a little later than the Rashba. He passed away about 100 years later. The Rashba passed away around 1310. The Rivash, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshes, passed away around 1410. And he was the Rav, actually in Valencia. He was a Rav in Valencia. In 1391, there were mass persecutions and killings against Jews in Spain, so he fled and moved to North Africa. But it seems that this tshuva is from the Spanish period when he was a Rav in Valencia, because it's addressed to a Spanish city, specifically Shativa, and he writes to Reb Pinchas bar Shlamya Lunil Yerei Elikim. So that's who it's addressed to. Sha'alta, you asked the following question. Kahal Yesh Lahem Beis HaKnesses B'iram, the community in Shativa has a shul. Va'asher echad min ha'ir, one of the wealthy individuals in the city, kana sham mekaymes yeshiva harbe bezoil. This guy is an investor. He bought many seats in the shul on the cheap. On the cheap. So in other words, it sounds like, let's say a new shul opened up, they're selling the seats. So this guy gobbled up a whole bunch of seats, and relatively speaking, he bought it for cheap. But now that the demand went up, because the supply is less, so the prices were raised now because of him. And because the prices went up, so now he's renting them out. He's renting them, he's charging extra rent. Okay, so even before we go further over here, you realize over here, that again, this is reinforcing the impression. It wasn't so clear in the Rashba's case. We didn't see any buying of a seat. We saw inheritance, we saw a matana, and we saw a fight over a seat as if it's a piece of property. But here in this tshuva, you see literally, we're buying and renting. We're buying seats, we're renting seats, and it reacts to the market the way any item does. And there was a consequence here, because the rentals now went up. The renters, in other words, in every community, had people who could never afford to buy a seat. So how do they sit in shul? If they sat in shul, they rented. Here, the renters, the rent was so exorbitant they couldn't afford it, so they stopped coming to shul. L'yoker schiras hamakoymes. So you could say they could stand. I don't know, maybe it's not so comfortable to stand, maybe it doesn't feel good that you can't afford a seat. So they say, you know what, I'm not coming to shul. So the community says, all right, let's open up new seats in a makam panei, in an open area, sheyesham. We'll sell additional seats. And the coffers of the community are going to expand, so that's great. Well, what's a new source of revenue? And then the populace won't be able to come to shul. People are literally not coming. We'll get them to come back to shul. So this is a no-brainer. Let's open up new places. Okay. So the monopolist gets up, and he protests. And he says, hold on a second. If you're going to open up new seats, you're going to put people there. So it's my seat that I'm the landlord of. I sit in one of them, I rent out others, and it's going to be harder for the people to access it. And so you're devaluing my seats by putting up these new seats wherever you're going to be putting them up. And even if there's still going to be enough of a path, the community of Shore said, don't worry, we're going to ensure there's going to be enough of a path to get to the seats. I don't care there's still a path, it's going to be narrower. It used to be there was 6 feet. Anyone who had one of my seats had a 6-foot aisle to get to their seats. All of a sudden now it's a 3-foot aisle. So that's not fair. Who gives you a right to devalue my seats by reducing the passageway to the seats? V'sha'alta, so Reb Pinchas bar Shloimeh asks the Rivash, the Yitzchak bar Sheshes, V'sha'alta im hadinimoy, is he right? Or im hakol, or maybe the community is right. So this guy is literally holding the community hostage, not allowing them to open up new seats. So is he right or wrong? That's story number 2, but definitely reinforces the impression over here. A seat in a shul is literally a piece of real estate. Let's go to number 3, the creditor. This brings us back to the Rashba. And the Rashba says the following, Sha'alta, you asked the following question. Reuven is sitting in a seat. He has a chazaka on the seat. But also everyone knows it once belonged to Avram. There's no disagreement. Everyone knows Avram used to sit here, and now Reuven is sitting here. These are obviously, as is very often in Shuva literature, this is all pseudonyms. These are fake names. John Doe. This is the John Doe in Halachah. Reuven, Avram, yeah. V'achshav now, Yitzchak ben Avram, comes Yitzchak, the son of Avram, who, remember Avram used to sit in the seat, and he's Toivea me Reuven, he sues Reuven, Sheyasa lo raya, that he needs to bring evidence, Shu yored sham b'reshus. Reuven, who gave you permission to be sitting in my father's seat? So Reuven responds, Sha'avram hoya chayav lo imois alav, your father owed me money, v'lachein, and he has since passed away. I don't have to bring any evidence. I don't need to show that I bought it or anything like that. And I don't need to leave the seat. You, as the heir, have to pay back the debt. You pay back the debt, you get the seat back. What do we see over here? Here, the seat was literally used as collateral, and when the loan wasn't paid on time, the creditor came and took the seat, as one does today, to when they impound a car or when they take or when the bank takes a house, and that is the question over here. The question to the Rashba is, one second, is that a valid claim according to Halachah? Is this a valid claim where we believe him and we say, yes, there was a debt and you're the creditor and that you had a right to collect the seat? Or do we say, no, one second, we don't believe you. We all know Avram was once there. You don't have enough evidence to say that it's yours, and so therefore you need to vacate the seat. This is the question that the Rashba was asked. Number 4, let's do the story of the tax evaders, and this brings us to another one of the Rishonim. He actually lives right in between this period, meaning he lives at the same time as the Rashba, but he's a little younger. So he passes away in 1327, so it's about 20 years after the Rashba. The Rosh we mentioned last week, he starts out in Ashkenaz in Germany. But the late 1290s or the early 1300s, he had to leave there because of the persecutions which we spoke about, and he came to Spain. That detail is going to be an important detail later on. Most of the teshuvos of the Rosh, more than 90% of them are estimated to have been written in Sfard, in Spain. There are very few that are from the earlier period of when he was in Ashkenaz, and that too is going to become a relevant factor as we move along. Let's see the question that was asked of the Rosh, Reb Asher ben Yechiel. She'ela, Kahal sha'asku achskama b'cheirem. The community made an agreement together in their bylaws. B'cheirem. B'cheirem here means, the Rosh later in the Tshuva explains what it means, that anyone who violates this is going to be under a ban. So what is the rule that they made? Shelo yimkiru es mekoimam l'shum adam, that you don't sell your seat sheyesh le bebeis hakneses in shul. When? Bishul shum choiv sheyizchaye, for any debt that you have. Hein mishum mas, whether it's the community tax. Hein mishar choiv, or if it's any other type of debt. Im loy beratzaim ba'al hamakom, unless the owner of the seat willingly says, you know something, collect the debt from the seat. What happened over here? It seems, we learned in the previous tshuva, we saw in the case of the Rashba, someone is claiming that he collected his debt on the seat. And this presumably was happening a lot. And every system that has laws of creditors and debtors, there's always an area where, okay, the creditor can't touch that. You know, it's the homestead. That's not something you could touch. You can't take away the person's gatkes. He needs to have his gatkes, right? So where each society draws the line is an interesting question. It looks like this community over here didn't like the idea that people are losing their shul seats. Maybe it was embarrassing for people. All of a sudden you come to shul one week and your seat is literally not there. You can't take it. Maybe it's very public. Maybe for some other reason. So the community got together and said, no matter what, even if it's for the community, taxes, because it looks like other communities did that. You didn't pay your taxes, we're taking your seat and we'll sell it to someone else. That'll pay your taxes. So these guys got together and said, no, you cannot forcibly take anyone's seat. Okay. Achar Kain, later, Ira, the story, an event occurred. Shehelilu hagoyim alila al beis hakneses. There was some sort of libel that the non-Jews made about the shul. There's no details over here of what it was. Our imaginations could run wild. We know various stories that happened in different times throughout history. Something here. They said something about the shul, the non-Jews did, and what's going to happen? So now we're in trouble. So how do Jews usually deal with these types of accusations? Usually with money. You pay off the government officials and then they decide to move on. So this is what they did. Now that's a hefty sum, 400 golden coins. Umanu berurim, so they appointed officers. Basically these guys went to each person and said, Chaim Yankel, this is what we think you're worth. So in order to pay for this huge expense that we just had to pay because of the libel, you're going to pay $100. Then they went to Reb Shloima and they said, Reb Shloima, you need to pay $200. This is what the community did. V'tiknu, and they made a takana during this event. Kol mi shelo yipara kafi ma sheyatilo alav. Anyone who doesn't pay the amount that these tax officers are going to impose on him, sheyimkuru mekame bebeis hakneses, they're going to just take his seat in shul. And what happened? Many people didn't pay. V'nimkuru harbe mekomes bebeis hakneses. Many of the seats in the shul were indeed taken. It could be for the simple reason people didn't feel like they had the money. People didn't have the money. They understood that the community was in crisis because of the libel. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. Maybe there was another reason they didn't want to give the money. All right, so the bottom line is the community came, took these seats and sold it. So the owners who just lost their seat, they're saying that the sale was no good. We remember 5 years ago, the community passed a law that said you can't take someone's seat away for debts. And that's what you just did. So the later legislation that was passed is not valid. Because they never vacated the earlier chedem. They have to kind of first annul that, which they never did. And they're arguing that there's a process for how the earlier legislation needs to be removed, and you need to involve the chacham, one of the rabbis, and that wasn't done. They just ignored that, and they passed this new legislation, and so they're saying, we want our seats back. The community says, no, we did it right. But maybe the argument was the very fact that we passed the second legislation, that in and of itself knocked out the earlier one, and so what we did is totally fine. And so the question comes to the desk of the Rosh, what is the din in this case? Again, all of this reinforcing how the seat in the shul was very much an asset, the way we think of real property today. Let's continue. Story number 5, the name tag versus the deed. This is also from the Rosh. Shaila. Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us, our master, be'inyan ha'makom shel beis hakneses, about the places in shul. Sheregilim ba'aleim, that the owners are very used to doing the following: l'mashchanam, it could be a mashkin. So if you want to borrow money and you say you don't think I'm going to pay you back, here the lien will be on my seat. Ula machram, it's very normal for people to sell their seats. Ula rishon lebneim, and to pass them along as an inheritance to the next generation. Va'minig li yesham ba'alamak kasul b'mekoymai. Shame. The custom is there are name tags on the seat. That's interesting. The concept of having a name on the seat goes back to the times of the Rosh. However, people aren't makbid that they're always going to sit in the seat with their name tag. They treat it much more casually. You have a man, Reuven, pseudonym, who his father's name is Yaakov, is labeled on the chair. And Yosef Mishnei Chazaka is there for more than 3 years. His father Yaakov passed away, and Nishar Amakim Becheskas Reuven. So Reuven, everyone assumes it's Reuven's seat. Va'ata Shimon, comes along Shimon, and he's protesting. V'toyen, and he argues, Shehusha Yisachar Aviv, that it's his father's seat, Yisachar. And he pulls out a document that says his father Yisachar bought it. Doesn't say from who. We don't have that information. The Rashba, the Rosh and the Tshuva is going to say it doesn't matter actually who. It's not going to affect the din. But the bottom line, he's bringing a document that says, Yisachar says, I bought it. So he's turning to Reuven, and he says, Reuven, you're saying your father, that's great. But you don't have a document that says you own it. I have a document that says I own it because of a purchase. Reuven says, Shakvar hechzik by mikayach aviv Yosef mishnei chazaka. He says, no, what do you mean? I have a chazaka. I've been here more than 3 years. Lefi shayosh my kasubay. And his name was there. V'loy bashum adam la'ar ala b'chayev. When my father was alive, Yaakov, no one protested. V'ato shu hechzik by b'tayras Yerusha. And now I'm there as a Yerusha. So his argument is chazaka and name tag. The other guy's argument is, I have a purchase document, and the question to the Rosh is, who wins over this seat? Story number 6, we'll call the assertive neighbor, and a small introduction for this. The introduction is, there's a din in the Torah that's called bar metzra. Bar metzra means that when a property goes up for sale, the neighbor, the one who owns the adjoining property, has the right of first refusal. And that is, the seller is supposed to offer it to him, and if the seller didn't and sold it, the neighbor has the ability to basically take it, give the value to the person who bought it, and say, force him essentially to give it to him. Why? The idea is because for this buyer to have 2 adjacent properties, he can't. The person who just bought the property, you just bought it, go buy another property. What do you need this one dafka? But for me, I need this one dafka because then I have 2 adjacent, right? That's bar metzra in a nutshell. So what happens over here? The Rashba, back to the Rashba, is asked, Oid nishal, b'koy mishal beis hakneses, im yesh b'em dina de bar metzra. There's a place in Shul that goes on the market. I'm the next door seat. And I would love to put a friend there, my son there, a brother there. And it doesn't look like seats are, it looks like sometimes seats, there's a shortage. So I want to use my bar metzra claim to buy the adjacent seat. So do we say the bar mitzvah applies in this situation or not? Very much, you see very much here how in all these teshuvos, a seat in a shul, a place in a shul, is very much just like karka. All right. Finally, the last story is the story of the bench expander. And this brings us back to the teshuvah of the Rosh. Shasha'altam, you say the following. Here's your question. There's a meseba achas, this is malashon like to hasev, to like recline, so it's a couch, it's a bench essentially. Meseba achas shal beis hakneses is a bench in shul, sheyesh lo chamish mekoymes, it has 5 spots. The tzad echad shal meseba samoch lehechol. One side of this bench is close to the heichal. Let me show this to you so we can see it visually. Here is the heichal. This is where the Aron Kodesh is. Okay, and this is the bench. All right. The bench is on the side. It's perpendicular with the wall of the heichal, and one side of the bench, specifically over here, is very close to the heichal. Okay, the eastern wall. Let's continue. But don't forget, on Mizrach Vant, it's chashuva seats. People like to sit over here too. So we have people sitting here, but our question is going to be about this bench over here, the one that's perpendicular. Okay? But there's spots between this bench and the heichal bench. Okay? So there's some room over here. Right. Maybe that's where they put the Spanish flag, or okay. All right. But now the guy who has the designated seat at the front of this perpendicular bench, right over here, seat number 1, closest seat to the Heichal. He comes, and what does he do? He removes the panel, right? Every bench has a panel at the end. He removes the panel that's right over here. And he takes the panel and says, you guys over here, you guys need the panel. And he moves it to the other bench. So right now there's no panel over here. And he added to the bench, and he made this bench longer. Okay, so let's get rid of this. And here you go. Now the bench is longer. Now there are 6 spots. So the guy who's sitting number 2 from the Mizrach Vant, he gets upset. And he says, initially, I was sitting second from the front of the bench. Worth 100 gold coins. Wow, so here we get actually a price of what a seat was worth. And now you turn me into third. Look at that drop off. From 2 to 3, how it's worth half the price. It's wild. Does guy number 2 have a taina? And say, you don't have a right to add another seat over there. He probably put a friend or someone. You don't have a right to do that because you're devaluing my seat. So this is the question that is going to the Rosh. So we saw 7 questions over here. I'm sure you understand we're not going to learn the answer to all 7 of the questions. We're going to learn answers, Be'ezus Hashem, to 3 of them. If I recall correctly, 3 of the cases. But all the 7 give us a certain impression. We totally have an impression over here when you look at all this. But now, here's another thing you need to think about. All 3 of these Rabbanim fielding these questions are Spanish. They're all from Sfarad. The Rashba is in Barcelona, the Rosh is in Toledo, and the Rivash is in Valencia. And so you have this very similar reality in this one geographical zone, and they're all living within 100 or so years of each other, pre-Spanish expulsion in Spain. And now let's say, okay, what about in the Ashkenazi literature that we have of this period? The teshuvos of Maram Rottenberg, for example, and others, and there are others, earlier or later, and for that matter, beyond teshuvos. What about in poskim, in where they write Halachah? Do we have any of this come up? And the answer is almost nothing. There's almost none of this. So you have here 7 questions, all kind of revolving around a very similar theme. And this is not all of it, by the way. I'm not showing you all of it. There's more. There's more from that these Rabbanim themselves fielded. So there's more. And there's an absence of this in Ashkenaz. So there must be a reason. When I say an absence in Ashkenaz, I mean contemporaneously, at the same time, and earlier. I don't mean later. We'll talk about later on. All right. We do have in Ashkenaz the following kata. Here's one kata that we do have on the seed. We have 2 k'toim. There are 2 passages that we're going to read about the situation in Germany. And when we read them well, I think we're going to actually see that the situation over there was different. So here we go. First up is Ra'avan. Ra'avan is Rabbi Eliezer ben Nosson. Rabbi Eliezer ben Nosson was one of the great Rishonim in Ashkenaz. He lived in Mainz, Magenza. He is earlier than all the figures we discussed so far today. He passed away in the late 1100s. He writes as follows: a person cannot consent to something that has implications negatively on his whole family. Where do we see this in the Gemara? Tanan Nami, we learned in Baba Basra and Daf Kuf Amid Beis, where it says as follows: Hamoicher kivroi, someone who sells his plot, his burial plot. Now, Rashi explains, the families would have family burial plots. So one individual comes along, and he says, you know what, I need some cash right now, I'm going to sell my part of the family plot. Says the Gemara, boy in b'nei mishpacha, the family members could come, and this guy passed away, they could bury this individual there, against the will of the person who bought this plot. Why? Mishum p'gam mishpacha, because it negatively impacts the family at large. One of the interpretations of this is, the family says we're going to have all the whole family's buried here, the bubbies, the grandkids, and everyone's here, and then there's one random non-relative buried right in the middle, it just doesn't look good for the family. So therefore the Gemara says that we could be mava. It's a din d'Rabbanan, obviously. Not Torah, the mechira is a mechira. No question about it. But it's a din d'Rabbanan that the Rabbanan said that the family has a right to revoke this sale. So that's an example of where a person can't go along and make a sale that has implications for the family. Alma zokt Ravan, ein mechira bedavar shubgan lemishpachtoi. The sale is not a sale in something that negatively impacts the family. V'hu hadini says she'ena yachel, that you cannot loy limkar, you cannot sell v'loy litein, and you cannot give as a gift makem avoisav, your ancestral seat bebeis hakneses in the shul. This also negatively impacts the family, and so therefore, the mechira is not a mechira, and the matana is not a matana. What does this sound like? It sounds like you have a family sitting on a bench, and they're all there together, and one of them sold the seat to somebody else, and all of a sudden, together with the Rosenfeld family, you have one other person plopped in over there. It's not nice for the family. It's not respectful, and so therefore, we're going to use the power of that din in the Gemara, and we're going to be mevatel this sale over here. Miu, however, he says, hadamim shanasan, the money that the purchaser used to buy the seat, machzirin lo b'nei mishpacha gam bekever, we give it back to him, both for the grave and gam b'makom beis hakneses, and also for the shul seat. Shelo yasid halekech. Obviously, the purchaser should not lose his money. What do we see from here? What's going on in Ashkenaz? Is there a makom kavua? Do people have designated spots in shul? Absolutely. It's arranged by family, which is something we didn't see so strong in any of the Sfard sources. We didn't see an emphasis on family. Okay. Do we see over here anything of like you own the plot and it's like a regular piece of property, you're mortgaging it, you're selling it, you're giving it? To the contrary, we see limits on your ability to sell it. We see limits. So the idea of seeing the shul seat, the shul place, as an area just like your house or just like your parking spot or something like that, you don't really see that over here. You do see that seats mattered. Seats definitely mattered. Seats were an issue. People have designated seats. But you don't see over here that bailos doesn't come yelling at you in this passage the way it did in the other ones. And there's going to be a very helpful shtickle here from the Rashba, where the Rashba is actually going to lay out the map for us and tell us that in his day, late 1200s, early 1300s, there are actually two ways Jews do shul seating. Let's read what he says inside. This is in the same tshuva where the opening tshuva, the story of the heir and the friend, he writes as follows. Yesh mixas hayaros, there are some cities, shemachaltim batei knesias l'mishpachos, that they divide the shul by family. They give the certain family a certain place in shul. The other one gets another spot. Then the families come, and they divide it amongst themselves where they're going to sit. The bchor gets the better seat, the younger guy gets a lesser of a seat. Everyone according to the dignity and honor and his reputation that he deserves. If that is the model that's going on, then you never really own your spot. Not for the purposes of sale, and not for the purposes of placing a lien on the seat. And even if you want to put someone else there, if other ones didn't want, they could get in the way. Why? Because you don't really own the seat. And if you do want to sell it, everyone could come and say, everyone in the shul, not only your family, could say, we don't want you to sell it. So theoretically, a person could sell a seat, and if the family says, yeah, we're good with it, and if the whole shul says we're good with it, then no problem. You could take the cash and use it. You do have a schus. There's a certain schus that you have, and you're giving that schus to someone else. If it doesn't bother anyone that you're making money, no problem. But if it does, they could actually intervene and they could get in the way. So this is a model that he describes and actually kind of fits what we saw from the Ravan, because Ravan also emphasized that he had family, like these family areas. So what happens is a family is given an area, but the family doesn't own the area. No individual really owns the area either. Ein lahem schia gemura. You don't really have schia gemura. This idea of it's like a kinyan karka is not something that you have. It would be more similar today. Like today in shul, someone buys the schus to give out atar resa. So you own the schus, but it doesn't mean you have any karka bailos. There's no karka bailos. You have the right to something. You have the right of use. That's what you would. That's what we would say. And he concludes in saying, "Chen kasa Rabbeinu Shrider Goin, Rabbeinu Shrider Goin." He's the Goin of the 900s in Pumpadisa. When he describes shul seating, he says it along this way, where there isn't real bailus. Then, says the Rashba, Yesh mixus mekaymis, there are some places, Shemachalkim benein kol mekaymis beis haknes chaluka gemura. They divide the shul seating a complete division. Lizako is kol echad bechelkoi schio gemura, where everyone owns their plot, their area. Limkar v'lasin tzachomishirta, you could sell it, you could give it to whoever you want. There's no limitations, just like you have no limitations on real property. Everything that we do here in our lands, what does he mean, our lands? So he's in Barcelona, Catalonia. So there's Catalonia, there's Aragon, there's Castile. These are the areas of Portugal. These are the areas that are part of the Iberian Peninsula. He's saying that's the way we do it here, which matches perfectly what we saw Rashba, Rivash, and the Rush. And I think he came in Hagam before someday. You in Valencia, that's what you guys are doing also, according to what I saw in your letter. So the first paragraph seems that the Rashba is describing the reality in Ashkenaz. Can't say 100%, but that's what it seems like. And if it's not the reality in Ashkenaz, it's the reality pretty close to the reality in Ashkenaz, where there isn't this Chiyah Gemura, which would explain why you don't have all these issues and questions. Most of these questions would not be questions if you don't have real bailos. You can't start invoking bar metzra if you don't believe. When does the question come up? If you treat it as a regular piece of real estate, so then you could use a bar metzra question, right? You're not going to ask a bar metzra question when it's not treated as a schia gemura. Likewise, many of these other questions, trying to figure out what prevails, the document, the shtar, or the chazaka. These things work well in a mindset that sees the thing as schia gemura. And indeed, we don't find sources in Ashkenaz, at least I wasn't able to see, of where we see people collecting you have a debt, we're taking your seat. What taking the seat? It's not it's a schus that I have. It doesn't have that type of monetary value. The picture becomes clearer when we look at Sefer Chassidim. Because Sefer Chassidim is a 13th century, it's attributed to Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, who lived in the 13th century in Germany. Regensburg, if I recall correctly. And over there he says as follows, don't talk to me about Yerusha when it comes to shul seating. It doesn't work that way. Medin Torah, there is no Yerusha for shul seating. Remember, in the Sephardi sources, it's always very clear that there is Yerusha. No, there's no Yerusha. And he brings a raya from the Gemara and Megillah. The Gemara and Megillah says that a Beis HaKnesses that's in a city that has visitors all the time, so it doesn't just belong to the people of the city, the local people. Because visitors are coming all the time, so it belongs to the rabbin. So the locals can't sell it. Because Klal Yisrael owns the shul. Says Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, if Klal Yisrael owns the shul, so then don't tell me that individuals own spaces within the shul. No one has bailos within the shul, he says. There's many other proofs I can bring. The reality is, he says, that everyone is sitting in their father's seats. It's a reality. People are sitting. It's not because they own it. It's a convention. It's a convention. We pashut don't want to have disputes. And this is the way to do it in the most peaceful way, where it goes from father to son. And therefore he says, and the following is not possible and should be completely unacceptable. That one should say, I have two seats. One from my father, and one from my grandfather. So I'm going to sell one of them. No. The whole reason, you're not a Yoidish. The only reason we tolerate Yerusha is because you need a spot. Okay, so you have one. The other one you forfeit, you lose it. You never owned it even. No one ever owned it. It was just a convention. So we don't want to hear any of that. You know what? That second seat, I'm going to choose who sits there. No, you're not going to choose. Lavko Kamine, who are you? Go sit in your corner. You have no jurisdiction over the other seat. You have no jurisdiction over the other seat. Okay, let me remind you the story of the monopolist. The monopolist bought out 30 seats, his seats. Right? So if he's living in Germany, they say, your seats? These are not your seats. I don't know if maybe lechatchila he wouldn't have gotten it. So such a situation couldn't have lechatchila arose in Germany. The situation that could arise is the Yerusha. Because that they were doing. Things were passed along. So a person says, I yarshan this one and I yarshan that one. No. We're taking it away from you. So if you put these sources together, you see the Rashba talking about two different realities. Artsai Seila and other places. So good chance other places is Ashkenaz. Then we see two sources in Ashkenaz. Sefer Chassidim says clearly that you have no schus in the seat. The Ravan did talk about family seating and stuff, but the only thing he did tell us was a limitation that you can't sell it because of Pekam Mishpacha. You put it together, it does seem that we're dealing with two different types of realities. One reality is where the seat in the shul is something you literally own, the same way you own your home. You own this 2x2 feet in the shul. Wherever it is, you literally purchase it, and any din that applies to regular land applies there. And it seems that was the understanding in Svard, at least in the 1300s, 1200s and the 1300s. When, however, we come to Ashkenaz, it's very, very different. We don't have this purchasing of the land. Maybe there was a purchase, but the purchase would be the way you buy a pasuk of Ata Aresa. It's the schos, the way you buy an aliyah. You're buying the schos, the permission to do something. You get no ownership in the actual place, which is, by the way, how I think the seats that are sold today in shuls. I don't think anyone's under any illusions that they bought the land. The idea is you're buying the right to sit there for a certain amount of time, which is much closer to the way it looks like the way it was in Sfard. In both places you see the seating was very entrenched, very, very entrenched, and it was an issue that people cared about a lot, though exactly how that played out was different as we just elaborated, but that is a common denominator. People really cared a lot about this. It was well entrenched. This was something that was important. Okay, so that's the first part of the hard work that we needed to do today. The second part that we need to do today is now look at some of these answers. What were the answers that the Rishonim gave to these? So we're gonna do 3 of the answers. So the first is the story of the heir and the friend. Let me remind you, these are the two guys who after 29 years of sitting together realized that they're in the wrong seat because that's what it says in the Pinkas. And one of them is a better seat, it's a preferred. Economy plus. All right. Zok the Rashba Azoy. So remember, Rashba just finished in this tshuva saying there's 2 types of places. Some where you have no ownership and where you do have ownership. So if there's no ownership, if you guys they're Valencia, but if theoretically you guys did it like the Ashkenazim, this is not a Shaila B'chlal. Ownership, there's no ownership. So I don't know how we would deal with that question. But I know that he wrote to them, I know that you do have ownership. So if you do have ownership, so we're going to treat this case exactly the way you would treat a similar dispute on a real estate. So let's see what he does over here. If you treat it like regular land, if one person had a chazaka, and he lived in that seat, it doesn't mean he lived there, but he used the seat for the years of chazaka. However, like treating it like a regular person treats a seat, without any protest, then also the chazaka works, the chaskase raya, and the chazaka is proof. So who's coming out on the stronger side? The recipient of the gift is coming out on the stronger side. Why? What's the chaskase raya? And the chazaka is evidence that what? Yeah, in the Pinkas it says that the person who died had the better seat. But they were sitting there, and after a few weeks, he said, you know something, you want to change? I'll give you my Game Boy. And he said, yeah, and they made a transaction like that. So that's what happened. But remember, the Rashba was treating this the way you would treat a regular property dispute. That only works if the person makes the taina. A chazaka without a taina, the Rashba goes on to say, is nothing. If I come to you and I say, what are you doing in this field? Oh, a chazaka. Yeah, but how'd you get it? I don't know. I don't want to go there. No. That's not how chazaka works. Chazaka works to substantiate a claim. You need to have a claim. What's your claim? So your claim needs to be, I bought it. Oh, you claimed you bought it, and you have a chazaka. Now you're talking. So likewise, we come to this guy. Why are you sitting in this seat? Chazaka. Yeah, but the Pinka says that it's not your seat. I don't want to talk about it. Then you lose it. I don't care your chazaka. You have 100 years chazaka. Then you lose it. But if he says, no, We made an exchange. It says Hakadan in the Pinkus, but a few years later, I was eating a super snack, and he wanted, I said, will you agree to change the seat? He said, yeah. I gave it, so then that's what happened. So that's a taina. Oh, together with the chazaka, even though he has no evidence for that, the chazaka is the evidence for the claim. So he needs to say the claim. The Rashba goes on to say over here, but the guy's not here, right? The gift giver is not here. He left town. So we're not going to find out from him anything. The recipient of the gift can't make the taina because he doesn't know. What's he supposed to say? He wasn't here 28 years ago when this... So this gets us into the sugya that Ashba says of when there's a recipient of a gift or when there's a yodish in this situation, Bezdin makes the taina for him. Bezdin is taina loy. Bezdin basically says, look, if the guy who gave you the gift would have been here, it is very likely he would have said something like this. And you have the chazaka. So we're going to essentially make the claim for you. And therefore, that's what we're going to do in this case. We're going to make the claim that yes, originally the one who died had the better seat. We don't deny it. It said that in the Pinkus. But some sort of deal was made later. We don't have the principles here to discuss it. But we're going to make that taina together with chazaka, and therefore it stays the way it is. And that's how Rashba poskin the shaila in the case of the heir and the friend, exactly the way he would have done it if this was a field or a house or something like that. In terms of the monopolist. All right, so remember this guy? This is the individual, where was it? In Shativa. This is the individual in Shativa. He buys up a whole bunch of seats, and then he's the speculator. Yeah, but he's a speculator, but he became a monopolist because he has a monopoly talk on the seats. And now the rent all went up. You remember this story. Zok de Rivash. Look at this. Hadin im ha'oshir hahu. The halacha, he has halachic claim. Because he owns those seats, and remember, if you're in Spain, you really own it. It's not a joke. And he currently has a wide path to his seats, in that empty space. The community does not have a right to take that away from him. They can't make it smaller. Basically, people now, instead of taking 3 steps to get to their seat, will have to walk around an extra seat, so they have to take a 4th seat. And this is lashon that they'll have to take a 4th step. This is lashon that Chazal use in the case of the mavli. What's the case of the mavli? So he brings from Baba Basa Daf Yud Aleph on Midbeis. Voshtei Darton says, Amar Rav Huna said, you have Echad Mibnei Mavli, you have a person of a mavli. So what's a mavli? You have over here a mavli. This is an alleyway. And this alleyway over here leads to a whole bunch of chatzeros. There's a chatzer here, there's a chatzer here, there's a chatzer here, there's a chatzer here. In each chatzer is a courtyard of a few houses. But for this case, it'll actually be easier. Let's just think each chatzer is one house. So there's one house in this chatzer, one house in this chatzer, one house in this one house in this one, and all 4 open up into this mavi. All right. Echad mibnei mavi. So one of these fellas, shabikesh listam keneged pischoi. He wants to close up against his opening, his door. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to close up his door. You close up your door, you're not going to get out. He's going to be stuck there for the rest of his life. So that's not what he wants to do. So Mepharshim explain what he wants to do is basically wants to take the area in front of his house, and he wants to build it up. He wants to, restaurants put, because of the winter, they put, I don't know what it's called, but they put this this vestibule in the front, right? So something like that. And man, he wants to put a little vestibule for a little more privacy or something like that. He can't do it. Bnei Mavei ma'akvin alav. The other people in the Mavei could say, no. That it's part of our pathway to get to our house. And now some of us are going to have to walk around it. Marba aleim esaderech. It makes it more difficult for us. Some of us would have to walk around that little thing, and so we don't want to do it. And by the way, it's important to emphasize, each person, it's not just as a public. You say, yeah, obviously it's public. Who gives you a right to put it up in public? No. According to Halachah, you have Dalet Amis, and that is considered yours. If you're one of the Bnei HaMavoi, you have in the Mavoi, the Dalet Amis in the area of your door legally belongs to you. And Alpha became, even though it legally belongs to you, you're not allowed to put it up because other people say, we have a right of way over here, and this is making it a little more difficult for us. Whether it's because it's making the road narrower, whether it's because we're going to have to take more steps, you're not allowed. This is the Gemara, and so he says, the same way you treat land is how you're going to treat a shul situation. Either you're making the path narrower, or you're making people are going to have to walk longer. He has a right to say, no, I'm sorry, I bought these seats. They had a certain configuration to them, who gives you a right to mess around with it? And so therefore the Rivash says that he's actually right. All right, now we all understand the tshuva can't end here. There's no way the tshuva can end here, and that's the end of the story. It's just not good for Judaism. So look, the Rivash continues. Aval, I'll give you an eitzah. Mashar Hashoim b'nei Lasoi, what the community could do. V'noalehem, it will be a very good thing to do. Hula says ketzev l'schirus hamakoimas, is you can make a price cap on rent control. You could introduce rent control. Basically say you're not allowed to rent a seat more than a certain amount of money. So all those people who were pushed out because they couldn't afford the rent, they'll be able to come back in now. And that's number one you could do. There's another thing you could do. They could also say that if you own a seat that you don't need, you must rent it out. So those two pieces of legislation the Shul could pass. Where do I see that? Because it says in the first parak of Baba Basra, the people of a community have the right to legislate what they want measurements to be. In other words, what is, like a tefach could be, there's a smaller tefach, a bigger tefach. So what is a pound of flour going to look like? What is a pound, for that matter? So we all know, a pound is a pound. Well, people could actually decide what a pound is going to mean in their society. And on prices, and on the wages. The community could get together and say, we don't want the porters to be getting more than $4 an hour. They could do that. And this is an interesting lashon, which he says, Kalaymar means, Lahanish Misha Oivar al Divrayim, they have the ability to punish all those who go against their words. In other words, the Gemara here gives community leaders immense powers to regulate the economy locally in terms of setting price limits, in terms of setting wage limits, and still in terms of determining what a measurement of a particular item is, and with teeth, with police powers, to enforce this with penalties, etc. So therefore, the Shul is a institution, a call. They have the right to say rent control. Rent control, you cannot charge more than a certain amount, number one. And number two, you must rent it out. All of a sudden, this guy now, he must rent it out. He's desperate. So he must rent it out so people could start saying, I'm only going to give you 4. I'm only going to give you 3. You have to rent it out. So it really impacts the market. These guys are really putting their finger for the benefit, tipping it in the benefit of these potential renters rather than this guy. So that is the solution that the Rivash gives in order to solve this problem. But look at the main claim. The main claim he grants. Why does he grant it? It's very hard to imagine how a psak like this would stand up in Ashkenazi Shul. It's very hard to imagine that. And that's where I'm going to tell you the surprise that's going to be coming momentarily. All right. That's the second case that we resolved. Now, let's go to the Rosh. Let's go to the third case that we're going to resolve, is the bench expander. This is the guy, if you recall, who wanted to add the 6th seat to the bench, and number 2 became number 3, and his value of his seat was reduced by 50%. Tshuva nirali sheyachal akif. Guy number 2 is able to withhold this change. Shalafi haroish chalku mekoimos. When they divided and bought these spots, it was all regulated around closer to the front. Harishain shesamach haroish meshubach. The one closest to the front is best. Va'asheni pachos mimenu. Second one leso. Va'ashlishi oy pachos, and the third one leso. V'chein kulam, and all of them. The fiar chakasam in haroish yifchasu demein. So the further away you were from Mizrach Vant, the cheaper your seat became. Hilkach, therefore, ein l'shana is binyan she'etzel harosh. You can't move that panel. Elamidas kulam. Everyone has to agree to this. V'oid, moreover, harevach shahaya bein ha'mesebo bein ha'mekomish ha'bekoitza lahechol shokol hakolhu. Remember that spot where he put the seat? That's public. That belongs to everyone equally. You don't have a right to just bring a chair and plop it in over there. Everyone has to agree to it. And number 2 could protest also for that. Even though that's not your issue, that's everyone's issue. Yeah, but it also is my issue. That is public area. And public area, you don't have the right to plop your seat down over there. And so therefore, guy number 2 has 2 claims over here. One is you devalued my seat. 2 is you do not have the right to take this public property and to use it in that way. And this is how the Rosh resolved the issue of the bench expander. Okay. Now, I was emphasizing the entire time how we have this 2 very different tracks. The real estate track in Sfard and the right of use, we'll call, in Ashkenaz, and these are very, very different from each other. And I've highlighted how none of these, at least what I was able to find, none of these teshuvos and questions and issues that we're seeing the Sfardisha Rishonim discuss, we don't see the contemporary Ashkenazi poskim discuss. But that's going to change. That is going to change. And as far as I can tell, the beginning of this change is actually with the Ramah. The Ramah in Choshen Mishpat, Simen Kuf Samach Beis adds a Hagah, something the Mechaber did not say, and the Ramah adds. The Ramah is Ramosha Iselis, and he's living in Poland, in Krakow, in the 1500s. Just like you have the din in a mavoi, so too in the place of a shul. Therefore, Asher sheyesh lemekomes rabim, a wealthy person who owns a lot of spots, ubnei haknesses buying lohisik safsalim, and the shul wants to add benches bebeis haknesses b'mekomes apnuim in empty areas. Ha'asher yachal limchais, the rich person can protest b'taina shemeitza lo yaderech, that you're making it too narrow, or marbal of aderech, or you're making it too many steps to get to my seat. What does the Ramah do over here? He essentially takes the tshuva of the Rivash and he codifies it into the Shulchan Aruch. He adds something that the Rivash didn't say. Miu im yesh minig be'ir holchan acharav. If there's a different custom of how you deal with these issues, then you could go with that. But if you want to talk Choshen Mishpat with me, this is Choshen Mishpat. This is the normal, just like with a Mavoi, this is what you would do in a Shul, unless you have a custom that goes differently. He continues with the tshuva of the Rosh, summarizing that the community has the right to come together and to say anyone who has the spot must rent it, and they could place a price, a limit on what that should be. And what starts happening here, and I'm not saying that the Ramah is the cause for this, but what happens is that starting with the Ramah, and it continues, we start finding poskim in Poland, poskim in Hungary, talking about shul using the language of the Sfardisha poskim. And suddenly you start seeing a flurry of very similar questions, the same type of questions that were asked in the 1200s or 1300s in Sfard, all of a sudden are being asked in Hungary of the poskim, the Chassam Sofer, and the Bach, and the Tzemach Tzedek, the first Tzemach Tzedek. It's very, very interesting. And you see over here, the Ramah essentially took a tshuva of the Rivash and he put it into the Shulchan Aruch. What's interesting about this is very often we think about what's the Ramah's role in the Shulchan Aruch. Say the Ramah looked at the Shulchan Aruch, said this is a great work, but it's missing an Ashkenazi voice. And my job is to add the Ashkenazi voice. Well, if that's what he was doing, he didn't do that here because he didn't add an Ashkenazi voice over here. So if you look at the Akdama of the Ramah, you'll actually see that he says he's here to do more than that. One of the things he says is that there's a lot of teshuvos and there's a lot of piskei dinim that the Mechaber left out in his Beis Yosef and subsequently in the Shulchan Aruch, and he wants to complete the record. And he makes a list of examples, some of whom are Sfardim. So the Ramah is not only there to tell you what needs to be done in Ashkenaz, he's also there to fill in the record. So the Ramah looked and saw all of this and said, this is legit. He put it in there. And again, I'm not saying he's the cause for it. It could be there's something else that's causing it. I don't know. This is actually a little bit of an enigma to me of how this happened, because you have none of this in the Tkufa of the Rishonim and Ashkenaz, as far as we can see. And suddenly, when you go to the 1500s, the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, you start seeing a lot of this. Obviously, when we come to the New World, America, Canada, Australia, the situation changes drastically, and so it's not the same at all. But for a very long time in Eastern Europe, you had very, very similar conventions and understandings that were there, very similar to what we had by the Sfardim about real ownership. And so, for example, you have a tshuva of the I don't remember if it's the Bach or the Tzemach Tzedek, who's saying, yeah, we accept the Rivash, but maybe there's another workaround or there's a certain limitation. It's very interesting. All right, and with that we are going to conclude with the following. A lot of what we saw today was disputes over seats in a shul. So here's why, as much as we understand why it happens, we also need to understand why it's an oxymoron to have a dispute over a seat in a shul. The Frierdiker Rebbe related that on the day or at the time period of his bar mitzvah, perhaps even the day, he asked his father, why does it say in the Siddur, why is it before davening? If Avos Yisrael is important, and it's important to have right away when we wake up in the morning, you should say Hareini not at the beginning of davening, but right after Moidani, right after Al Natilas Yadayim, you should say it's a posik. So you have to wait for Birchas HaTorah. Okay, say it right away, but depending on what the truth is, in the Wednesday shir we spoke about that it seems like the Rebbe had the custom of taka doing karbanis right away. But if you don't have that custom, then you're doing Hareini later. So this is the question that he asked his father, the Rebbe Rashab. So the Rebbe Rashab answered, when a father has a lot of children, many children, his ikar tainug is when he sees that they're all ba'achtos and when they love each other. Tefillah is about asking for our needs, the physical needs and our spiritual needs. So before you ask of it, if you want God to grant it to you, you need to make sure that He's in kaviyachol, the mood of granting it, and so therefore you need to make a nachas ruach la'avinu shabbat shamayim. So therefore, we put right before davening the Hareini Makabel Alai mitzvah saseh, because that is what gives Hashem immense pleasure when we take on the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. It's like, to use yeshivish language, it's a din in tefillah. It's a din in tefillah because the tefillah needs it. It's a prerequisite for tefillah. It's not so much about reminding myself that I need to have Avos Yisrael. No, because if so, then you would have to do it earlier in the morning. No, it's about saying, now I'm davening. I want my davening to be effective. There's a prerequisite for that. The prerequisite is Avos Yisrael because you need the cause and nachas ruach by the Eibishter. And so once we understand that davening needs achdos and Avos Yisrael, it makes so much sense that when we're davening in a shul, that we want to do everything possible to increase in that type of Avos Yisrael. And fighting over seats is kind of getting in the way of the reason we all came here to engage in that activity. And so with that, let us all proceed now to daven Ma'ariv with a spirit of Avos Yisrael.